the alcohol in the yard wasn't that bad.
We got in trouble a couple times.
Yeah,
No charges ever filed though,
No.
so.
Good.
that was good.
So, yeah, went to Saint Barnabas and Mount Carmel High School.
I was
And then-
gonna ask about Carmel.
Yeah, so I'm a Carmel Class 85. And, you know, the Mount Carmel grads are kind of taking over. I don't know if you noticed, Matt O'Shea, the alderman's a Mount Carmel grad. Tom Dart, the sheriff, is a Mount Carmel grad. So we
Well,
feel
that's
like we almost have the market cornered.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
we've got a few Leo guys in there too.
no, I always say Leo is the school probably most like Carmel, so
Yeah.
I'm a Leo fan. But, and then went to University of Illinois in Chicago and majored in political science. I always kind of wanted to get involved in government politics since the time I was a little kid. And did what any good Southside boy does after I got out of college. I went to my alderman's office and volunteered, worked for Mike Sheahan when he was first running for sheriff. Then Mike got elected sheriff in 1990, and I worked in the sheriff's office for 20 years.
Wow.
16 years as the media spokesman and community relations person for Mike, and then the last 4 years as the chief of staff for Tom Dart when Tom Dart became sheriff. And then back in 2010, the state rep at the time, Kevin Joyce, announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election, so I ran for that, got elected to the State House back in 2010, and then 2 years ago got elected to the State Senate. So I've been in Springfield now just over about 3.5 years. Obviously, kind of an interesting time to be down there. You know, a lot of changes, a lot of conflict, a lot of big issues that we had to deal with. Unfortunately, some of them issues that were neglected for the longest time. You know, like you've heard a lot about pension reform type things. It was just something that the legislature just.
Move
Do you need me to move over a little bit?
by
Sure.
the flag because that light is
Oh,
terrible.
okay, no problem.
And I'm,
So,
if I get something good on here, I'll get it on Rachel Maddow. No, forward.
So that was a problem that, you know, was neglected forever. In fact, it's interesting, just last week, the Senate parliamentarian who's researching pension issues, he found a report from a agency that no longer exists, the Illinois Pension Commission, from 1917, that chastised the General Assembly for not fully funding pensions. So it's literally a problem that's gone on for 100 years. A lot of people think, oh, you know, Blagojevich messed this stuff up. I mean, he messed stuff up, and he contributed to the pension problem, but it's something that's gone on for 100 years, literally, and I'm proud to be part of a generation of lawmakers down there that finally did something about it, that passed, I think, a fair new law to try to deal with the problems. There's some question whether or not the Supreme Court is going to allow it to stand. A lot of people think that they might declare it unconstitutional. But I think that it's significant that we finally stepped up and did something. There are a lot of other issues that are important. So right now we're on sort of a break from Springfield. We don't, through this, I'm lucky, my wife is much less angrier at me than she was in past years, because this summer we didn't get called down to the legislature at all for any days during the summer months, and we won't be back there now until after the election in November.
That's the veto session?
Yes, so the veto session will kick in November, and that, as the name would imply, is time, it's a short session, only about 6 days, over 2 weeks, where we would deal with bills that the governor vetoed. The governor's only vetoed, though, a couple of bills this year. There was one that's there, and they were both, you know, none of them real high profile. There's one, I don't know if you've read about this whole thing that's going on, the fight between the cabs and these new ride-sharing companies, Uber, which a lot of young people are using, where it's just a regular guy driving in his car, and you use the internet and your cell phone to have them give you a ride somewhere. So the cabbies say that that's unfair to them. There was a bill passed in Springfield to regulate these ride-sharing groups, and the governor vetoed that. So we're going to, we'll probably deal with that. There's another kind of interesting that, again, didn't get a lot of attention that we'll probably deal with, where one of the problems, you know, obviously the real estate market's struggling to recover. The condo markets are awful. I don't know if anyone has owned a condo and tried to sell it, but it's a really tough time to do that. And one of the things that condo the real estate agents pointed to is that because there's been so many foreclosures on condos, you would have condos that would be empty for months, and the owner of the condo, because they were foreclosed on, wouldn't pay their assessment fees. So you would end up with this backlog of assessment fees that when the new buyer comes into, they're responsible for. So you might think you're buying a condo for $100,000, and then they tell you, oh yeah, and you owe $9,000 in 2 years worth of skipped assessment fees. So the real estate people said that's restricting the condo market. Can we put a cap on that? And we did. We passed a bill to do that. The governor vetoed that because a lot of the condo associations said, oh, that's going to kill us. You know, we have bills to pay. We need that money. So those are the two vetoes, probably the two most prominent bills that he vetoed. But we'll do other stuff that doesn't involve vetoes. You know, we can take up business. It's a lot harder if we try to pass a bill during the veto session that's, you know, a new bill, which we can do. It has to pass with a 3/5 vote instead of a majority vote. So it's very difficult to do that. One of the things that we might at least have a lot of hearings on and debate on, and it's a really interesting issue, maybe you've seen some of the things in the paper, is kind of looking at our drug laws again, and looking at them in relation with the gun laws. Mayor Emanuel and Superintendent Gary McCarthy from the Chicago Police Department have pointed out that a lot of times the Chicago Police Department will arrest a gang member who has a gun, commits a crime with a gun, and that they'll only get probation. You know, they'll end up not spending, you know, maybe just a couple days in jail. And they want to see those gun crimes increased with some automatic sentences that say you have to do some prison time. There's been a pushback against that. Some of it has come from gun groups who are afraid that law-abiding citizens who get caught with a gun and, you know, maybe they didn't have the right permit could get caught up in it. But there's also a pushback from a lot of African-American members of the legislature that feel that this will unfairly target their community. One of the compromises they're trying to reach is to say, like, okay, well, we need to rebalance the system. We have all these jail cells and prison cells being occupied by people who have low-level drug offenses, like they just got arrested with a small amount of drugs, and they're tying up the court system and they're tying up the prison cells. Let's lower those sentences and raise the gun sentences, and, you know, it's an oversimplification, but basically let the drug people out and fill those cells with the gun offenders. That's kind of the, you know, the suggestion out there, and it's a really interesting debate, and I think one that we need to have. I personally, I think, would be open to relaxing some of the possession laws related to marijuana, like a small amount of marijuana, because, you know, I saw this when I worked in the sheriff's office, that you have jail cells being taken up by these low-level violators, and it bogs down the court system. You know, we go crazy when we hear, you know, why does it take 2 years for a criminal case to go to trial? It's because there's a lot of these other cases in there gumming things up. So I would be open to maybe looking at it for marijuana. I'm a little more reluctant to do it for harder drugs like heroin and cocaine. I would hesitate to lower those sentences. But I do think we do need to do a better job of making sure that gang members that have guns, or using guns in crime, that they actually do jail time. I think that's really important, and I think will provide relief to some of the neighborhoods in the city where we see a lot of gang violence and a lot of killing. You know, it's interesting. I point out we hear so much about the murder rate in Chicago, and it's bad. It's worse here than it is in a lot of other big cities. But still, people don't realize, right now, you look at the crime statistics, the city of Chicago is safer now as a whole than it's been any time in my lifetime. It's our murder rate, our violent crime rate is at as low as it's been since the mid-60s. No one knows that. You don't read that in the paper. You don't see that on TV because they tend to focus on the sensational. But even given that, we still have, you know, pockets of the neighborhood, just a couple of couple neighborhoods, a couple of zip codes in the city where we have a real high level of violence, and maybe tightening up these gun laws will help there. So that's kind of a brief rundown on what's happening in Springfield and what I think we'll be getting into in the next couple of months. Yes, sir.
Senator, what's the state income tax situation now?
Yeah, that's another big issue. So what's happening right now is back almost 4 years ago, the state, before I was a member of the General Assembly, the state raised the income tax from 3% flat tax to a 5% tax on non-retirement income. Retirement income is not taxed in the state of Illinois.
They're not gonna change that, I
No,
hope.
I don't think so. But it's
That
funny,
would
you know.
cause a revolution.
Well, yeah, and that's why I don't think it'll happen. But one of the things I've found is I've been out running for re-election and knocking on doors and talking to people. There's a lot of people that don't know, that don't realize that Illinois doesn't tax retirement income. Like I've had conversations with people, with, you know, senior citizens who are on pensions, Social Security, and they say, I pay income taxes. And it's like, yeah, you pay them to the federal government, you don't pay them to the state.
Yeah.
Illinois is one of only...
If they ever filled out a tax form,
Yeah,
they'd
they
find
must
out
not
real
pay
quick.
attention, yeah. But, you know, Illinois gets beat up for a lot of these things, and I don't think, you know, enough people realize that that is a real break that senior citizens get in Illinois. There's only 3 states that have income tax that exempts retirement income. So that's a real good benefit to living in Illinois that you don't hear about, you know, and I think a lot of people don't know about. But at any rate, so the regular personal income tax rate raised from 3% to 5% with a sunset provision in it. And that's what people say, it's a temporary income tax. It's scheduled to start rolling back on January 1st to go from 5% back to 3.75. The rate would go down to. So that will probably, at least in the next half year, create about a $2 to $3 billion hole in the budget. So the legislature is going to be tasked with the duty of either allowing that to sunset as scheduled or extending it further or doing something in between. Now, Governor Quinn is running saying he wants to make it permanent. He's out there and that's what he's campaigning at. And I bring this up because I think the way the governor's race is probably going to predict how this is going to turn out. Bruce Rauner is kind of hedging his bets a little bit. He says it should be temporary, but you know, maybe it shouldn't scale down as quick as it is. Maybe we need to keep it in place at some level higher than 3% for 4 years and then gradually roll it all the way back. And let's look at some other revenue. He at one point did say, he has since flip-flopped, backtracked on it. He at one point said we should look at potentially taxing retirement income. But he has since sort of pulled that back.
Yeah.
That was
So
one of
I
the
heard, the
things.
mayor
Yes.
said that too, though.
Pardon me?
The mayor said that too.
Yes. So, so that's, it's going to, so I guess what I think might happen is if Governor Quinn gets reelected, he's gonna say, I campaigned on this. I said I was gonna do this. We have a mandate for the people to make that permanent. If Rauner wins, then we're gonna end up somewhere in between. My personal viewpoint is, you know, there's this big debate about, is this temporary? What does that mean? You know, one of the things that's really hard is when you're running, which, believe it or not, we as General Assembly members don't have a lot of credibility with regular voters, you know? And one of the reasons we don't is because we say things as an institution and don't always follow up and do the things we say we're going to do. So I think that there's an expectation in the public, not an unreasonable one, that that tax is going to roll back to some degree, that it's not going to remain at 5%. I would like to see us do that and then pursue some other ways to make up for the lost revenue. One of the things I've come out in favor of are 2 potential solutions that will not penalize middle class and working class families, but also keep the revenue levels equal, and that's do a progressive tax structure where the amount, just like the federal system, where the amount you pay goes up or down, the percentage you pay depending on your income. That would require a constitutional amendment in Illinois. Or there's another proposal for a millionaire surtax, that any income you have over $1 million, that there's a surtax on that. Those are 2 opportunities where I think we can lower that 5% for the overwhelming majority of people in Illinois, but not have to close, you know, but still have a similar revenue level that doesn't force us to close down prisons, doesn't force us to cut spending to people, you know, programs for that take care of people with developmental disabilities or that fund education. So that's what I'd like to see us do. But it's going to be a really interesting debate, and I think a lot of it kind of depends on which way the governor's race goes.
We still got the hole in the pension.
Well, right now, the state pension problem is, I hate to use the word solved, it will be solved if the Supreme Court upholds a bill we passed back last December, Senate Bill 1. So, and I voted in favor of that. It was a tough vote, probably the toughest vote I made. I've had, a lot of angry teachers, come to my office, are really upset about it. But what I tell them is, I worked for 20 years in the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I'm vested in the county pension system. I'm going to be dependent on a pension too when I retire. I would like that pension system to still be there and still be solvent and still be able to make payments. And that pension system and all the other pension systems won't be able to do that if we don't make some changes, which is why I voted for Senate Bill 1. Now the main thing, there's a lot of moving pieces, and a lot of stuff gets blown out of proportion, but the main thing to think about with these, the pension reform is nobody's pension in any of these proposals is ever going to be reduced. If you're a retired teacher and every month you got a check for $3,000, the pension reform, even the one we passed, it's not like now that it's passed and becomes law, next month instead of getting $3,000, you're going to get $2,700. What we did is we harnessed the growth of the pension. Since the late 80s, the General Assembly was handing out goodies to everybody. They set for every state pension system a compounded 3% COLA every year. So regardless of what the rate of inflation was, which the Social Security is tied to the rate of inflation, the Consumer Price Index, this was an automatic 3% compounded COLA.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
That was a mistake that really exploded. The main reason for the pension crisis is underfunding. The state, and the same thing with the city pensions, not making their payments. The secondary problem is the COLA has expanded the benefit, and when you project the debt over 30 years, it really blows it up because, financial planners will tell you, I've heard them say that there's no force like compounding interest. So, and the one way to look at it is if you retire at age 55, which you can in a lot of the retirement systems, and you're getting that 3% COLA, and say your pension is $40,000 a year the day you retire, in 22 years with 3% compounding interest, $40,000 becomes $80,000. And if, most people that make it to 55, make it to 78 and longer. And that's the other thing that's happened when pensions were invented, first conceived, nobody thought that individuals were going to live 5, 10, 20, 30 years after they retired. Just no one accounted for that. And now you add to it the phenomenon of compounding interest that really explodes the debt. So what we did is we said, instead of getting a 3% compounded interest, you would get your pension would continue to grow, it just wouldn't grow as fast. You would get, depending on the rate of inflation, most years what you get would be about a 1.5% raise to your pension, and it would be flat. It would not compound. There's a lot of other parts to the pension plan. We put a cap saying that, any income you get over $109,000, which is like the Social Security max, any that you can't get, that's not pensionable. There's like school superintendents who retire with $250,000 salaries that end up with $200,000 a year pensions that, like I said, in 23 years become $400,000 a year pensions. So that's what we cut the line on. That was the essence of the pension reform package we passed. Now the state constitution has a line in it that says membership in any government pension system is a contractual relationship that shall not be impaired. That's the language in the Constitution. We've all sort of played this guessing game. What's the Supreme Court going to do with that? Are they going to say what we just did is an impairment of pension benefits? It's been a guessing game. That we passed that bill in December. It takes usually about 14 months to get a case like that to the Supreme Court. We haven't booked any of the savings. We're not sure what they're going to do. Well, back in July, we got a pretty good idea of what they're gonna do. There was a case on a different bill we passed to put state workers, up until that bill was passed, got free health care, didn't have to pay premiums from the time they retired to the time they were eligible for Medicare. So you could retire at 55 and go 10 years with free health insurance, essentially. You'd have to do co-pays at the office and when you got prescriptions, but you paid no premiums. We took that benefit away and said you had to pay a fee depending on the size of your income. The Supreme Court found that, back on July 3rd, found that unconstitutional. They said that those health benefits are part of the retirement package, which makes them part of the pension, which means they are protected by what we call the impairment clause of the Constitution. So they threw that law out. So now most experts, you don't really have to be an expert to read their decision and see that they're probably going to declare Senate Bill 1, the big pension relief bill we passed, unconstitutional too. And then we're
We
going to
vote the Supreme Court unconstitutional?
you can vote, there's, when they're up for retention,
Yeah.
you can vote them out of office, but it's been, every 6 years, any judge, whether they're on the Supreme Court or a local circuit court, goes up for retention, and they need to get 60% of the people need to vote yes for them to stay, and that almost always happens. There has not been a judge in Cook County since 1990 to lose a retention vote, which is, I think, a big problem, and I have a bill to deal with that would move the retention to a merit board that would review the judges and decide whether or not they should stay on the bench. Because right now, it's not supposed to be, but we have a de facto lifetime terms for judges in Cook County. Yes, sir.
What I'd like to see in your discussion about this, the different groups, is this golden parachute that a lot of politicians and political groups have done to give them double and triple pensions in the last 3 or
Yes.
4 years.
Yeah.
Now, if we at least gave their tax benefit a cap of $100,000, we'd pick up a lot of money,
Right.
to fund those
We
pensions.
put in, it was part of Senate Bill 1 and some other bills, we've passed legislation, most of which I think will be upheld as constitutional, to stop double dipping, essentially.
How about taxes on them, though, these guys that make,
Well,
get
what
over
we looked at doing, it's an
100,000?
interesting point, we talked about taxing retirement income. A lot of the public employee unions came to us and said, when we're trying to, find a way to fund the pensions, they said, don't cut the benefits. We will advocate, and our members, we've polled our members, our retired members, they're okay, they will pay a tax on their retirement income as long as you don't cut their benefits. So that was looked into, it was examined. Can we just change the exemption that we have right now for taxes on retirement income and say that if you have a publicly funded pension, you do have to pay taxes. And there have been previous court cases on the matter that say you can't do that it's a violation. Is that what you're talking about, or you mean something
No,
different?
I'm not talking about the
Okay.
little guy in his pension. I'm talking about his boss and the union leaders that come to you,
Okay.
and they're double
With the higher
dipping,
number.
and they're
Okay.
somehow they get pensions from 3 or 4 different places.
So you're saying when
and
they get to a certain level, tax that?
they get $200,000 in
Right.
pensions.
Right. Well,
Why
we
should a pension be that luxurious if
It
it's a
should be.
pension?
Yeah, it should be, and that's why we put this cap on
We
what
don't-
you could pay the pension. But we run into the same sort of constitutional issues. We have by state law, we have a flat tax. We have to charge everyone the same. If we're gonna charge someone an income tax, we have to charge them the same level, regardless of their income. So that would make it constitutionally undoable for us to say, let's tax the high numbers, but leave, the janitor who has a $20,000 pension, leave him alone, but let's tax the superintendent who has a $200,000 pension. We can't tax one and not the other unless we change the Constitution to have a progressive tax structure, which I would be for doing, but that's difficult to do.
Bill, I know you're busy behind schedule. We appreciate you coming. These guys want to answer. You guys all satisfied with everything?
Any other questions or anything?
No, that's
Well,
good,
no.
Bill. Thanks a lot
Okay.
for your time.
I have one more.
Sure.
Did you have a relative that went to St. Mary's College in Winona?
No, I did not. No.
Because there was a Cunningham up there that went to Mount Carmel, so I thought.
Okay, no.
Yeah.
You know, I always thought, like, when I first ran for office 3.5 years ago, that there were only a couple Cunningham families in the neighborhood, in the area. Now I think there are probably like 200 different Cunningham families, because I've had so many people.
I'm ready.
You see, that's what I got the whole time, no relation, but the whole time growing up, and before my hair fell out, it was red. It like got darker and then started falling out as I got older. But the whole time growing up, I would have people, oh, you're one of Red's kids. I'm like, no relation. I ate enough cheeseburgers at Red's to feel like I was related to them. But no relation to Red Cunningham.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
No, we appreciate you coming.
Thanks. Anytime. Excellent, thanks. And let me know when you